What's up, y'all? This is episode 9 of Curiosity Theory. We're going to be talking about astrobiology, alien life, exoplanets, and probabilities of amazing things happening in the world.
Absolutely. Curiosity Theory. Thanks for tuning in.
There's so much that is exciting to talk about in this field. I think this is a really cool episode. We're going to nerd out about a lot, right? We're going to talk about alien worlds, the possibilities, astrobiology, what our universe might consist of, the things that we don't know, and maybe like the relationships between science fiction as well, right? And your degree actually kind of fits in a lot of this. And I'm just so fascinated with the nature of your research, which can you remind people what that actually is?
Absolutely. So I'm an astrophysicist, but specifically I study what are called exoplanets. This is short for extrasolar planets, literally planets outside of our solar system. So the ones that I study orbit other stars. Other stars have planets just like the sun, but there are also what are called rogue exoplanets, which are planets outside of our solar system that orbit no stars. Those are a bit harder to study, and I don't really.
Right. So how do they even form? Because do they form the same way that stars form, just like a nebula and there's like gas?
A planet in general, or
like
a
these
rogue
planets? Or
the
sometimes
rogue
they're
planets,
kicked off?
Yeah. Well, there's two. Yeah, there's basically two hypotheses for how you get a rogue planet. The first is that they could just form in space, right? Like the stuff that you need to form planets and stars is in space. We tend to find them around planets because stars in that formation process do a good job of kind of like bringing everything together and putting it into a disk. So you kind of get an abundance of heavy metals that could form into a planet. But it's possible that you could collapse a smaller disk or a smaller gas column to form like a Jupiter-sized planet, so a gas giant that's not quite a star and maybe not even quite a brown dwarf. So there's the idea that you could form rogue exoplanets that way, and then the other way is that they just get kicked out of their systems. And dynamical simulations show that this is a common occurrence.
What would kick a planet out of a solar system?
So when you look at a solar system like ours, we got the 4 rocky planets in close, the 4 gas giants further out. What this configuration tells you is that there's stability here. When you look at a system, whatever you see is what was stable over a long time period. But that's not necessarily what the system looked like in the beginning. You could imagine our solar system having a couple more planets that formed early on, but the configuration was not stable. There's gravitational tugs from other planets. Every once in a while, you may have a planet that gets kind of nudged towards the star and then does like a gravitational swing around it and gets kicked out of the system.
Right. Isn't that kind of what happened to Earth when the moon formed? There's like two bodies that's like the hypothesized, right? There's like 2 large bodies.
Nah, that's a little bit different. So 2 bodies do crash together, and that is the chaotic environment that I'm talking about. Right, you have a bunch of little planetesimals that are forming and growing and colliding, and some of them are getting kicked out, and some of them are, becoming the Earth and the Moon. And that theory, this impact hypothesis for how we got the Moon, is something else that you may expect in a really chaotic young solar system environment.
Like what is young? Like what in this context?
Young is going to be it could depend, but anything within the first few tens of millions of years. Really, a star isn't even truly on the main sequence until, depending on the type of star, until many, many millions of years. So the dynamics in a young system are sort of hard to track, right? A star lives to be many billions of years old. When we look with our telescopes, balance of probabilities, we're going to see old stars. There are some young ones that we see forming, but it can be hard to see the planets. And then again, the dynamical interactions are going to be things that are happening over millions of years. So it's not like we can just look at it and be like, oh, here's a planet that's getting kicked out. You kind of only see these snapshots.
Right. So I don't actually know this. How do you determine how old or young a star is, right? Because stars can be different colors and different sizes, but that doesn't necessarily predict or indicate their actual age.
Yeah, there's a few things. So young stars tend to have really, really strong XUV output. They're very, very noisy. They're very active.
Like ultraviolet? Is that ultraviolet?
XUV, oh my bad. It's X-ray and extreme ultraviolet.
Okay.
So this is like super, super, super high energy output that is driven by like crazy magnetic activity that's happening as the star is continuing to contract. Right, and hasn't like really calmed down yet. And then something interesting that happens is over time, a star will what we call spin down. It'll start spinning slower, and it spins slower because of the magnetic field itself. It's called magnetic braking. Like material comes off of the star and is like there's this braking effect between interactions and material coming off the star and the magnetic field around the star.
Gotcha. Okay.
So over time, like a star will spin down. It'll have a lower rotational period. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And like early solar system. So my understanding of like an early solar system, right? You have this maybe like nebula, like this cloud of gas, which could be the remnants of previous stars, right? And then this like disk forms, right? And it's kind of like, I mean, just for people, so people can visualize it, it's kind of like this cloudy disk, right? And then like the early formations of what's going to be a star is forming at the center of that, right? And then planets are kind of forming at the same time, right? Or
Yeah, it's so it's a process that kind of takes a long time. You have a clump of it's the right idea. You have a clump of gas. We would call this like a column of gas that had some overdensity, and so it could start to collapse gravitationally, and then that thing gets a little more gravity and it can collapse more. And then over time, this spherical blob of gas has particles within it that all interact with each other, and so all of the up and down velocities cancel out, and you end up with just whatever initial angular velocity was, angular momentum that this object had, which is random, right? So a system could be any which way, and that's why we see disks around these systems, because you're kind of just left over with everything being in one direction, and that's why you can form planets, because you have collapsed this enormous volumetric column of gas into a disk where everything is in the same plane and has the opportunity to like basically to grow.
Right. And so most planetary systems revolving around a star are on the same orbital plane? Or
100%. Yeah.
Like 100% of them? Or like most?
No, 100% you're right that most are, yeah, but not all of them. You could get a planet with a orbit that has some obliquity that's like tilted with respect to the plane of the system. But the common configuration is to be in that plane just because initially everything is in the same plane.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, that's fascinating. And so, one of my favorite science fiction novels, and this is kind of some of the other things that we're going to touch on, is called The Three-Body Problem.
I love that. Did you watch the Netflix?
Yeah, which, I think it was good. I actually went to the premiere for it, and I met the executive producer and all that, too.
Oh, that's dope.
Yeah, it's got a picture with him and everything. But The Three-Body Problem is, like, literally my favorite science fiction novel of all time. Like, it was written originally in Chinese and then translated to English. And, I thought it was just fascinating just to give people, like, a high-level understanding of it. So there's, like, two stars, right, and be like binary star systems, which are relatively common in the universe, which is my understanding from the Three-Body Problem.
I think that when you look up
They're
in
more
the
common.
night sky,
Right?
on average, what you're seeing are stars in a binary pair.
Right, which
they're
means
going to
they're-
appear brighter, right, because it's two stars closer together.
Right,
To
two
you, it
stars.
seems like a single point.
Yeah, and so they kind of usually are orbiting like a central point of gravity, right?
There's like some common center of mass.
Right.
And this is a natural outcome from where stars form from. In a nebula, you'll have a bunch of like star formation, and you have two gravitational bodies. There's a high likelihood that they'll kind of get attached to each other and remain in orbit, and a relatively stable orbit, because there's only two bodies, right? The three body is the instability. It's
Right,
like
that's the
there's this
problem.
there's like this inherent chaos when you add too many bodies to a system. But a two body is very stable, so oftentimes you get binary stars that.
Yeah, no, it's like such a fascinating concept, and like we've both messed around with like Space Engine and these other universe simulators, and so we've seen these binary systems orbiting each other, and then you try to add a third star. A lot of times it becomes more chaotic. And the Three-Body Problem imagines, what if you had a planet orbiting this tri-Solarian system that had a chaotic orbit, and so didn't have predictable climate patterns, seasonality, but developed a super advanced intelligent life. Like, how would that life be adapted differently than us?
Yeah.
And what if we had to face this alien civilization? Like,
Yeah,
it's a fascinating concept.
Conceptually, it is really interesting. You know, from a dynamic standpoint, a 3-body star system is already unstable. There's the closest star to us, Proxima Centauri, is also in a triple star system. There's Alpha and Beta Centauri.
Right.
There's Alpha Centauri A and B.
I think it's actually based on that system.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's, you know, it's like that system itself is stable because you have a binary pair in the middle, and then the Proxima Centauri is orbiting on the outside. Proxima Centauri also has a planet. And so we know that there's an Earth mass planet orbiting in the closest star to us that is also in a triple star system. But I guess importantly, it's only orbiting the single star, and it is not like getting looped in some situation like that where there's so much chaos in the planet because it's like getting exchanged between the stars or whatever. It's so unstable that it wouldn't last. So you know, that part doesn't really hold up, but it's still like really, really fascinating to think about. Yeah.
And I think it's cool because it kind of it's this play on biology, right? Like outside of our understanding of it and how it might work. And, you know, it kind of makes me think about some of the other maybe anthropocentric assumptions that we might be making as it pertains to alien life, right? Like, you know, we talked about this before, like assuming that something is going to be bipedal, like an intelligent alien species, right? A lot of Star Trek, a lot of these other science fictions that we see, things are bipedal. And like bipedalism, evolutionarily speaking, is actually not that common in animals on Earth, right?
Yeah,
like
it's pretty rare.
It's like us, kangaroos.
And I don't even know, are kangaroos considered bipedal? I don't know. I mean, kind of. They like leaned over. They also hop. But yeah, I'll oftentimes hear people invoke this idea of convergence, which in evolution, it's where animals evolve the same traits independently. So a good way to, you know, the go-to example of this for me is flying. Mm-hmm. There's many different insects that independently evolve to fly. Birds evolve to fly, which are dinosaurs, right? There are mammals that fly like bats. And so flight is something that is considered to be convergent. It's so helpful that it's something that I would say you could assume on another planet, if the conditions are right, probably there are animals that can fly. Like, it's something that's that beneficial. Right. But on
an avian intelligent species is interesting. I don't think I've seen a lot of those.
Well, like, what does that even mean? You know, I feel like when we say avian, you're already talking about something that is so far down the evolutionary tree of Earth-like biology and circumstances and specific things that happen to the Earth, specific ice ages, specific asteroid impacts, whatever DNA base that we started with. And it's like, we do that, right? When you talk about Shaifer, it's like, oh, this is like a reptilian species or an avian species. And like, that's like, why would it be that? Why would it be avian? Why would there be an avian? Like, why would they be bird-like?
Like, I guess the question
why would they be reptile-like?
Right. The question, I guess, is what selective pressures would exist on these planets that might produce that as an evolutionary outcome? Right. Another version of convergence that I think is fascinating is the carcinization, right? Like the crab-like nature. It's like independently, the crab-like body morphology has evolved in multiple different iterations of
I think
crustaceans.
4 or 5 different times that we know of.
4 or 5 times is crazy.
And so I think you can make a really strong convergent argument just based on what we know about biology, which again is biased towards Earth biology. But I would believe you if you said, well, convergence should tell us that there's probably crab-like animals somewhere. I would agree with that. But I do have a problem accepting the invocation of convergence for intelligent beings that like walk on 2 legs. Like, I get that that's us, but on Earth, we don't have another example of that really happening. Yeah. So I don't feel like convergence is appropriate there.
So
it could happen, but I just don't feel like that is a very robust argument starting from what we know about Earth life.
So I think intelligence is an interesting one to argue. Like, is that being highly selected for on Earth? Another sci-fi that I really am interested in, I read it years ago. It's called Blind Sight. I don't know if you heard of Blind Sight.
No, I haven't even heard of that.
So Blind Sight, they found this self-evolving, self-replicating spaceship, right? That was like self-aware in this way and demonstrated that it was hyper-intelligent, but like didn't pass certain tests that they would test it for, like consciousness or like sentience, like an ability to be self-aware. What the evolutionary outcome of this species they determined was that consciousness is actually a superfluous use of like brain matter, right? And like to be like awareness of self is not a prerequisite for intelligence. And I was like, that's an interesting assumption that, you know, I think we might, like something that we might assume when we think of intelligent species. Like, does it have to be conscious in the way that we think of consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, how really do we think of consciousness? How would you define consciousness?
I think what I would say is it's an awareness of a self relative to the rest of society, like being able to refer to yourself as an I or as a me. Right, and being able to look in your mirror and be like, I am a separate entity. Like, what is inside of here is separate from the rest of the stuff outside. And like being able to kind of conceptualize that internally and differentiate yourself from the outside world in that way.
So an animal that can't do that isn't conscious, you think?
I don't know if I'd argue that exactly. But yeah, that's kind of a loose definition of consciousness in my mind. Yeah. Did you define it in a different way?
Nah, I mean, it's like hard because eventually it feels like you're finding a line to draw in the sand somewhere, and it's like just far enough that we count. But then like you get a lot of animals that seem like they should count, but then maybe don't. And I think that like I've tried to think about what to me like how would I define consciousness, and it almost does feel like I wouldn't go as far to say. I mean, I definitely agree with you that the awareness of self, but I feel like you don't even have to go that far. I almost feel like it's awareness in general. Like a plant is aware of a lot of things, right? It's like aware of the nutrients that it's receiving. Plants can communicate with other plants. They can send nutrients through these like super complex mycorrhizal fungal networks.
Like mycelial networks, like
underground, and it's like so. There's a lot of awareness there. It's conscious of things, right? Like a thermometer, in a sense, is conscious of the temperature, right? Like it responds to this change in the right? So the molecules are getting warmer. Now, would I say a thermometer is conscious? No, it seems like it's conscious, like in this one axis,
interesting,
in this one dimension. But as you start to layer all these things to be conscious about, eventually you get to a point where you're like aware of yourself and your past and your future. And it just seems like we seem to be far on that. I don't think we could say that other animals haven't reached that, orcas could be like reflective of their lives over time. And much in the same way. That's hard for us. That's like a hard thing for us to tell, but it seems like all life really is conscious. It's just like the total number of dimensions, like the number of axes that it has that awareness. Right. And it seems like we do have more than most animals, at least, or most other life forms.
So by that definition, you might be able to argue that some of the, maybe not this generation, but like maybe a couple generations down the line, iterations of multimodal AI systems would be conscious because they have camera sensors and they can hear your voice input. Yeah. So they are aware.
Well, yeah, I mean, and this is like, I feel like I'm getting a little bit out of my wheelhouse with this, but I'm going to apply the philosophy that I just kind of constructed right there. And if you think about the dimensions, like the correlations that it can make, what's the word in the LLMs? I forget what it is.
What the parameters?
Parameters, right? You could kind of consider a parameter as like an axis of awareness in a sense, right? There's like some correlation that it has latched onto, whether or not we understand it, not sure if that really matters. And so once you become aware, I know I'm being like fast and loose with these terms, of this enormous number, the seemingly infinite number, trillions and trillions and trillions of different axes of like meaningful, at least to the algorithm, awareness. Like who's to like that? To me, that is like becoming more conscious. I know that doesn't really fit in with, I think, what we tend to think of as consciousness. Right. But I also think that for me at least, that consciousness is more of a like, how many things are you aware of?
Like the axes of awareness,
right?
Like how many axes of awareness are you in possession of?
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that almost reminds me of, we talked about this a little bit too, like these like brain organoids, right? Which like there's like some of them that are independently developing eyes, which some people don't realize. They're actually like, the eyes are the brain, like they're so these like what brain cell organoids are these stem cells harvested from, I believe, living adult brain tissue and then grown in petri dishes to try to solve like rudimentary computing problems, right? But these cells maybe exhibit some degree of awareness, but for the most part, like that's like a line that people haven't, like the consensus there is that this is not like a conscious entity of cells, right? And to any degree that there's any ethical issue.
100%. That's interesting. I guess my thing would be that it's doing things. It's conscious on some level, but yeah, if it's like, I don't know, how big are they? Do we know like how many neurons are in there? Like what the?
Yeah, actually, not off the top of my head.
Right. So I'm assuming that it's not like a full brain. It's,
right. No, definitely not a full brain.
Right.
Yeah.
So then
significantly
maybe
smaller.
Yeah. So I would assume that it was like had many less axes of awareness, and that's not even a defined like term in how I'm describing these things, because I don't think that our awareness is just sight, hearing, smell. There's like all different types of things that must be going on in our brain that we haven't even begun to understand yet, and I would consider like all of those axes of awareness. So you would think that a little organoid has like some of those things,
right?
But I don't think it's it's a little bit scary, honestly.
Because
think about it, growing eyes. I remember that picture.
Right. At what point does it become an ethical concern? And I think shifting gears back to the astrobiology piece of this, like what other axes of awareness could exist that maybe we wouldn't define as conscious, right? That other living organisms might exhibit in places that aren't Earth. I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah. I mean, how do we don't even know how to define life, really. There are definitions, but if you ask biologists, you could get different definitions. I've talked to people who would agree with the definition that we have of life so far, where viruses aren't really included.
Right.
But there's other people who do think that viruses should be included as life. I mean, they do things, they have like goals, they move around, they inject themselves into cells to replicate. And they go, and it's like, I understand the, they require a host. They can't like replicate on their own. But that sort of seems, again, that feels like we're drawing a line here. A virus, it seems like, if we found something like that on another planet, we would say, oh, this doesn't really count as life.
All right, I would imagine that would suggest evidence of, like, if there's something that can only replicate with a host and there's like multiple copies of it, then it would suggest that there is, right? Yeah. And another aspect of kind of astrobiology that I think is fascinating is, tardigrades in space, like these water bears, these microscopic organisms that are like basically like tanks. Yeah. They can survive in these extreme temperatures and even in the radiation of space. And it kind of brings me to actually a video I made years ago, man. It was about panspermia, which is kind of this theory of like that life on Earth didn't independently evolve on Earth first. It was instead maybe seeded by life from another planet like Mars, where the conditions for life were more viable billions of years ago, and maybe a meteor strike impacted Mars back then, and the seeds of life were like brought over into Earth. I think this is a fascinating concept.
It is. It's really interesting to think about. To expand a little bit more on that, we do think that early on, both in the system, Venus and Mars were more like, I don't think it's right to think of it more like Earth is now, but more like Earth was then. Mm-hmm. So you kind of have these planets.
Oh, Venus too. I didn't know that.
Early on, yeah. So Venus has been subject to this runaway greenhouse effect, which is really interesting. Venus is really bright. If you ever see it in the night sky, super bright. It's the brightest object, brighter than Jupiter. Now, part of that is because it's so close to us relative to the other planets. But the other part is that its atmosphere is highly reflective. It reflects almost all of the sunlight that it gets, not quite all, but almost all of the sunlight that it gets back into space. And then, so you would ask, why does this planet have the highest surface temperature of anything in the solar system, of any planet in the solar system?
Hotter than Mercury.
It's even hotter than Mercury, which is considerably closer to the sun. It's reflecting almost all the light. Why is it so hot? And it's because the little light that does get through gets trapped forever. You know, not technically, not literally forever, but the greenhouse effect does not allow it to escape. Right. And so it gets even hotter, and it just kind of like has this runaway effect.
Right, which my understanding, my environmental science background, we always learned about how certain gases in the atmosphere, they trap heat more effectively than others, right? So you have like carbon dioxide, CO2, which is a greenhouse gas, and then methane, which is an even more effective greenhouse gas at trapping heat in the atmosphere.
Water is also a greenhouse gas.
Yeah, water is a greenhouse gas also. And so the density of the Venusian, I believe it's Venusian, right? Venusian,
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't usually say that.
The density of Venus's atmosphere is like Venus has a substantially more dense atmosphere than Earth.
Oh, for sure. Right? The atmospheric pressure would like crush you if you were to stand at the surface.
Right. So like, despite it being able to reflect all of this heat back out into space, anything that gets trapped, like you said, it stays.
Yeah, and exactly. You think of that super dense atmosphere, and mostly it's CO2.
Right.
So as it's trying to work its way through, it's getting reabsorbed by more CO2. Yeah, so, it's like a... Right. But you brought up the panspermia thing, and early on, because Mars is less massive, it probably cooled off a little bit quicker. So you could imagine that if Earth and Mars were identical in as many ways as they could be, with the mass difference that they have, where Mars is smaller and less massive, then Mars would cool off faster just because it's smaller. Right? And so perhaps the conditions for life to evolve happened first on Mars, and then we already have evidence that Mars rocks are on Earth. So this is something that happens when there's an asteroid impact, stuff gets flung into space, and there are ways to test and figure out exactly where this rock came from. And we have Mars rocks on Earth. There are moon rocks also on the Earth.
Yeah, and if we have now verified that there are species of microbes on Earth that can survive the radiation of space, inconclusive.
But a tardigrade has been evolving for a long time, and the period that we're talking about would be very, very early on in Mars history, right? Mm-hmm. So this impact,
like how long ago?
It would have been like maybe 1 billion years after the solar system formed.
So like relative to where we are now.
System's 4.5 billion years old, so maybe like 3.5 billion years ago. Mm-hmm. And for the record, life started on Earth when the solar system was about 1 billion years old. So maybe it like cooled off a little bit before that. Mm-hmm. But for 3 billion years, life was just simple. It was like, approximately single-celled. And it wasn't till 500 million years ago that things started to get much more complex. Right. So, that would make me think that if life did start on Mars, it would be really simple and rudimentary.
Right.
And
it wouldn't be tardigrades.
Yeah, right? Like tardigrades have been evolving for a long time. There were no tardigrades around 3 billion years ago on Earth, or 2 billion years ago, or 1 billion years ago, right? That's like a relatively down the line evolutionary adaptation that tardigrades have.
It's fascinating. So going back to Venus, I think another thing that's really interesting to me conceptually, and I don't know much about the feasibility of this, but it's the Project Havoc, the high altitude Venus operational concept, where it's like we can, and again, I think you can probably shed some light on this. Theoretically, the atmosphere of Venus, like the upper atmosphere of Venus, has relatively habitable temperatures compared to Earth, and I don't know what the concentration of gases is in those in that atmosphere, but potentially if we were able to engineer a floating city, it could exist That's what Project Havoc, I think, is claiming.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's the gist of it, right? It's like as you go, so the surface of Venus is not livable. The pressure's too high and it's way too hot. We also can't breathe the atmosphere; it would be toxic. But it turns out that if you go maybe 50, 55 kilometers up, you will run into a layer that has roughly the atmospheric pressure that you'd face at sea level on Earth. So 1 atmosphere, which, that's 1 Earth atmospheric pressure. So if you go that high up, you can get to a place where you can at least not be just crushed under the pressure. And the temperature does cool off, but it's still like too hot. But it's probably manageable, right? It's not like hot enough to melt lead type of thing, which is what it's like on the surface of Venus. I forget what year it was, the 70s maybe? I'll have to get fact checked on that. But the Russians landed a satellite on Venus.
And it only lasted like minutes, right?
Right? They got like a picture of the surface. It's really cool. They did it a long time. It was like a very cool, they were able to keep it cool for a few minutes and then it just overheated. And yeah, it's like, I think that was a sort of an unpleasant surprise for everybody. I don't know. It's exciting when you do a mission like that to think like, oh, maybe there's something cool going on Mars or there's something cool going on Venus. And I actually want to talk about the channels on Mars in a second. But back to the Project Havoc, which is a real NASA mission, like you were saying. You get up to that, so it's like it's still too hot, but the pressure is okay. The gas, there's like CO2 everywhere. There's sulfuric acid clouds. This is very corrosive. So you would have to have like some sort of resistant to sulfuric acid setup there. And it just seems like it's a little bit, I don't know if it's like actually worth the squeeze. There's violent winds as well, like 70, 80, 90 kilometer per second winds.
Yeah, and imagine your floating city like somehow dropped like, a couple hundred meters.
So
you're cooked, literally.
The cool thing is that using oxygen balloons, which we need oxygen, so there would have to be, you need like some sort of processing system to produce oxygen, whatever that would be. And the balloon, the oxygen is less dense than the CO2. So you could like reliably float if you had, the right weight of balloon and the right amount of oxygen. And so I don't think that like maintaining altitude would be an issue.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So that is a pretty cool idea. But then again, you're still like dealing with these extremely violent winds that like are whipping around the planet.
Right.
It's very corrosive. You'd never be able to leave, right? You would be stuck in there forever. I just feel like you could accomplish the same thing.
Like you can't achieve escape velocity on Venus's upper atmosphere?
What do you mean?
Like you said, you'd never be able to leave.
Well, you'd never be able to go outside of your ship.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, you would be like stuck indoors. You would, like you could go back to space, but
that's the only way out.
Yeah, like you would, is that the really? So if you're going to be stuck in this, then why not just be in orbit? Why not just be in orbit around Venus?
I wonder if there's any protection from solar radiation in the upper atmosphere.
Well, it's interesting. Venus doesn't have a strong magnetic field.
Oh, magnetic field. Okay.
But it does provide protection because of the thick atmosphere. It does provide protection from the more harmful solar radiation. So that's like, I guess, the one positive that you get from that atmosphere.
Interesting. Yeah. And so Martian channels, we're going to talk about. These are like carved parts of Mars that suggest evidence of existence of water, right?
Oh, no. Well, we have found those, right? We have found evidence of like dried rivers, lake beds, that sort of thing. So strong evidence that Mars used to have liquid water on the surface. Maybe even some that at times it does now. It's the planet that we kind of know most about besides the Earth. We still don't know a lot about it, right? We have a couple of rovers there. There have been some missions to orbit it. We sent the InSight lander, which is a seismograph that was detecting Mars quakes, which I think is cool. It was able to detect meteor impacts that were happening somewhere on the planet. It was like able to detect those, which is like really cool conceptually.
Yeah.
But the channels on Mars, so in the late 1700s, there was this Italian astronomer, Giovanni Schiaparelli, And he saw in his telescope, and to him, he saw these canali, meaning channels. He saw like these lines, this grid that seemed like it was on Mars. It's not clear if that was like eye fatigue or if there was some weird aberration in the telescope. This was the early days of, not the super early days of telescopes, but they definitely aren't what they are now. And he saw these channels, which he posited were the like interplanetary grid of however these intelligent Martians were traveling. And this led to H.G. Wells doing the broadcast of War of the Worlds, which is the intelligent Martians trying to escape their dying planet and then sort of showing up and coming to take ours.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure
people thought it was real at the time.
Yeah, I think people were scared about it. But that was inspired by these channels that Giovanni Schiaparelli thought that he saw.
Interesting.
And then Percival Lowell, who's a serious astronomer, there's a Lowell Observatory in Arizona named after him, also thought that he saw these channels on Mars, which is pretty interesting. But I think that we've obviously sent tons of things to Mars. They're seeing things. I don't know what it was, but whatever they were seeing is not real. There aren't, it's not old, like abandoned infrastructure or it's not like evidence of a past civilization. He was just kind of seeing things.
So what is the likelihood that you think we'll find evidence for life in your lifetime outside of planet Earth?
Evidence for life, that probably depends who you ask.
Right.
Like, what is evidence for life?
Right. Based on an exoplanet researcher.
What would we consider evidence for life? Is it like a byproduct from life? We breathe out CO2. What if we find a planet that has a lot of CO2? Well, we know of lots of planets with CO2 that don't have life. Venus, Mars. CO2 is a pretty common molecule in the universe. So it's hard to like hone in on a single byproduct. But you could think of like multiple byproducts. What if there's CO2 and oxygen, which are both associated with animals and plants? And then methane, which is also associated with like the decay of things and a byproduct from animals. So what if you found all of those? All of these things are also naturally occurring, though. Like there's many ways that you can get methane, CO2, and oxygen that don't have anything to do with life. Something that is interesting is that oxygen, O2, and methane in the upper atmosphere, they combine and annihilate. So that would tell you that if you saw a constant supply of oxygen and methane, there must be something creating it.
Right.
And so like maybe that's an indication
Interesting.
that there was life. Because if all life ceased, eventually they would all annihilate and you wouldn't be able to detect them anymore. There's also this really cool idea of what's called the red edge. So, plants absorb the visible and UV like light. This is what they use for photosynthesis, but they don't absorb red light. They reflect it. So if you think about what a planet that was covered in some sort of photosynthesizing organisms, it would have this red edge where it's brighter in the red part of the spectrum, the visible spectrum, and then has like this drop off where the plants are absorbing and not reflecting the shorter wavelengths of light.
So I'm actually curious about whether there's an assumption there about the wavelengths of light that are emitted by that specific star system, and if the like photosynthesizing plants on orbiting a planet on a different star system might absorb different wavelengths.
Huge assumption, which is like getting into it depends who you ask, because there are a bunch of assumptions there. That is behavior that we would kind of expect with the life as far as we know it and how it would have looked relative to our sun. But, there's no reason that photosynthetic life on another planet couldn't use all of the light that was coming from the star. Or maybe for whatever reason, it favors the red light, right? So it's like there isn't, we can get super creative and speculative, but it's just hard to pin down what the right investigative approach is, because you have to start making all of these assumptions.
Right. So all we need to do is find like one additional data point that suggests life exists somewhere else outside of Earth. Like something that I'm excited about in our lifetime is maybe sending, and I'm not sure how far out this is, but like maybe sending a rover that will sample Martian regolith, like Martian soil, and then something that will come back to Earth and show us. Or I guess you could just put a microscope on a rover, and then that microscope, like it'd be really fine-tuned instruments.
So there is actually a plan for the retrieval of the rocks that have been collected by, I forget which Mars rover, but my buddy, Dr. Alvin Smith, he's at NASA in Houston at Johnson, and he is one of the leads. I think he might be the head. He's one of the leads up in the leadership that is supposed to be figuring, putting together some of the stuff with NASA is obviously up in the air because there's like all these budget cuts and everything. But there are plans to retrieve the rocks that have been collected from Mars, fire. Which is super cool. Yeah. Dr. Alvin Smith, really cool dude too.
Interesting. Yeah. That is so cool, man. I feel like it's going to be either that or, I mean, I don't know. Do you think JWST, like James Webb Telescope, is equipped to actually resolve evidence of life?
In theory, it should be, right? It can't, when you say resolve, it's not like it's not going to be able to see planets that we would consider potential hosts for life. It can directly image larger gas planets. I think recently they actually they directly imaged a Saturn-sized planet. Mm-hmm. But this is for a relatively young system. So it's like a hot gas giant. Mm-hmm. So, this is not the type of planet that we would typically probe for life. But in theory, James Webb Space Telescope can do atmospheric spectroscopy. Mm-hmm. So you think about a planet orbiting a star, and if it comes in between you and the star, it'll block out some of the light, but some of those photons are going to go around the disk of the planet, mm-hmm. go through the atmosphere, and come to you, and should get absorbed by whatever's in the atmosphere. So you could potentially find like biosignatures. And, this sort of spectroscopy has been done on a lot of planets. The problem is, if we're thinking about Earth-like situations, you're really talking about a small planet that has relatively thin atmosphere. Mm-hmm. We don't think about this on Earth because obviously we breathe the atmosphere. We talk about it. The power of like even a little bit of extra CO2 in the atmosphere can change the face of the planet. But if you look at a picture of Earth from space, the atmosphere is really paper thin. It's a very, very, very small atmosphere. If I were studying an exoplanet that was similar to Earth and were dozens of light years away, I would probably just say that this was a stripped rocky planet that mm-hmm. didn't have a significant atmosphere. And that's because it's hard. We have not demonstrated the ability to detect a Earth-like atmosphere. Right. It's too hard. You just don't really see anything.
Right.
But that was the hope for JWST. And I mean, it still is, it's still possible. The TRAPPIST-1 systems have been observed, and it doesn't look like any of them have significant atmospheres, but I wouldn't be surprised if they all had thin atmospheres. Like I said, if they had an atmosphere like Earth, it's not clear to me that we have the ability to detect it currently.
That's so interesting. And so, I mean, what is the limiting factor there, like technologically? Like, is it literally like the size of the mirror, like those unfolding golden mirrors that JWST has? Like, they just need to be larger? Like,
yeah, well, a larger telescope always helps, but
why? Why does that help? Is that like kind of the same way that cameras work? Like, just like the wider, the larger the sensor is, the more light is let in?
It's a little bit different than cameras, but it's similar, right? So if you think about resolving, let's try to like build up this understanding conceptually. You think about resolving an object, mm-hmm. right? So what is the object actually doing? It's like either reflecting or emitting light. In a planet's case, it would be reflecting if it were like a small rocky planet, but if it were a larger gas planet, then maybe it's emitting. So if you want to build a picture of it, what you need is a telescope that's big enough to collect enough light, which remember is being spread out as it travels, to reconstruct an image. So you imagine like a star that's extremely, extremely far away. The reason that you need a huge telescope to resolve that star beyond a pixel is because all the light is being spread out. So you've kind of got to like gather a large amount. And this is why, if you wanted to resolve like an Earth-like planet that was extremely far away, you would need a telescope that's like larger than the solar system or something. Because the further away something is, the more that light has spread out. And to reconstruct the image, you've got to be able to bring it all back in. So we can, for nearby planets, like the Habitable Worlds Observatory, which is being worked on right now, we do think that we'll be able to actually directly image Earth-like planets at Earth-like distances around their stars, at least ones that are nearby. But it's, you have to be able to kind of pull back in all of the light, and the distance that you are away from something increases the like spread of that light.
Dang, that is intensely fascinating stuff, man. It definitely has me excited about like this frontier science research that I think like what has always driven me in terms of curiosity is like the limitations of our understanding and progress as a society, right? And I think like your research, like the innovative technologies, they kind of all intersect in that. And I just think it's intensely fascinating stuff that we should all be excited about and fund.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Don't know why we're cutting all this science funding. That's like the
and some of the other things, like I think sometimes people are like, well, that stuff is so far away. We got problems here.
We do.
And that is definitely true. But also a lot of the innovations that have occurred in our progress to become, I don't want to say like a spacefaring civilization, but even just like getting into space, getting humans into space has led to these creations of all these interesting innovations, like the cell phone, and there's a bunch of other ones that
MRIs were
MRI
created by
machines.
physicists.
Yeah, like these things wouldn't
the
be
CCD cameras that are used. These are like iterations on early sensors to be able to collect astronomical data. There's a number of things that these kind of like surprises that you get when you do research and you figure out that this thing is, hey, this is useful for this other thing. It's also like kind of a hard sell though, because you're saying like, hey, if we fund this a lot, there's going to be some random discoveries that we can't predict, and we're going to find, and they're going to make life easier or like more worth living or whatever. Or like there's going to be medical advances. Those things are hard to predict. But I don't know. I always feel like as humans, the one thing we had going for us was our curiosity and like explorative attitudes, the willingness to like venture off into this new thing and see what we could do and how we could leverage our knowledge for this, this new thing.
That excites me. Like in an era where we have technology tools that can do a lot of the things that we thought smart people like would always only be able to do and no other intelligence on Earth would be able to replicate. Like some people have a lot of existential dread for that, but we have this curiosity that might be able to be tapped because of the support of all these different intelligences that are being sprouted up by kind of this next wave of innovation.
Yeah, as an optimist, there's a lot to be optimistic about. There's a lot of like really good outcomes, I think, from you getting everything in the right direction and trying to be smart about moving into the future. But there's also like a lot of things that could go wrong and a lot of negatives. But I tend to be pretty optimistic.
Yeah, same here, man. I know we're getting close to wrapping up on this one. Is there any other thoughts that you wanted to share as it pertains to astrobiology, kind of alien life, the prospect of life on other planets, things like that?
One of the big thoughts about life, extraterrestrial life, that has kind of consumed the way that I look at it now is that I think that we just go down the wrong path when we start making all these assumptions that are very much based on the evolutionary tree of Earth life, which there was this one initial organism we call, it wasn't one specific one, but we call it Luca, the last universal common ancestor that every single living thing can be traced back to. And, we know like around when that era was. And how many ways, using, with all the atoms that were in that, all the molecules, how many ways could that first thing have been different? Because if you just change it slightly, I almost guarantee that you sort of change the entire evolutionary tree in ways that we couldn't even predict, right? Because that thing led to cuttlefish and humans and also bears and also fungi. And so it's like, what if it was just a little bit different? What are those possible outcomes? And I mean, even if you started back at Luca again and just pushed a reset, would the same thing occur? Would the same thing happen at the same time? What if the extinction events are slightly different, right? What if some weird thing that was 1 in a trillion didn't happen, but some other 1 in a trillion thing did happen? Right. How would everything be different then? And it's like, I don't know if we can really, we sort of seem to be so far out of our depths with what we understand about life that, you know, it kind of feels like we're just in the dark looking for a black cat without a flashlight.
You know, I think this is another interesting thought, man. Like, what are the odds that, you know, over 10 billion years after the origins of the universe, you know, this common ancestor would have all these evolutionary trees that branch out, and at some point that would create an early ancestor of all humans, and then of those multiple generations of victors of the race from sperm cells to the egg cell, we were the one victorious sperm that raced to the egg cell and became the embryo that grew up and became us.
Yeah.
Like,
what are those actual odds? It's like some insurmountable, it's a number that you can't really comprehend. I feel like I've heard 1 in 400 trillion, but that seems way too small to me.
Yeah, that seems like too big. It seems like it would be less likely than that.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
I think that the number 400, the denominator is too small. I think the denominator is probably way bigger.
Right. So we have one life that was highly unlikely to be around. And what are we doing with it? I'd like to keep staying curious, man.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what it's all about. You know what I think it is? I think it's a 400 trillion sided die was the thing that I heard.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that's
but
wild.
yeah. Yeah. I don't know why. I don't know why. Like, why us? I don't know.
Why us? But we're here, so we determine our why.
Yeah. Deep. That's deep stuff, man. It's the deepest thing I've ever heard you say.
All right. Thank you all so much for tuning in to episode 7